Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yacker. Today's show is part 2 of my 2-part interview with Charles Lear, author of The Flying Saucer Investigators. I know you'll enjoy it.
Thank you very much, Stan. Pleasure to be here.
How did the UFO investigators interact with each other, and was there any rivalry among them?
Oh, yeah, as there always is. The two main groups were APRO and NICAP, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization and the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Now, from the get-go, NICAP, Donald Keyhoe ended up being the director. After his predecessor, who lasted a year, T. Thompson Brown, was ousted. One of the rumors, he claimed to have developed an anti-gravity device. And one of the rumors is that he was ousted because he was siphoning money into his anti-gravity research from APRO. So rumor. But in any case, Keyhoe took the helm. Keyhoe made his name writing first an article for True Magazine, Flying Saucers Are Real, and then expanding on it and publishing it as a book in 1950. It was the first book on flying saucers. He later followed up with Flying Saucers from Outer Space. So Keyhoe, you could say he had confirmation bias going into his investigation. Meanwhile, the Lorenzens didn't come to any sort of conclusions, kept an open mind, and, let's see where the research takes us. Another weird thing about Keyhoe was that he focused on the craft, the objects, the lights, but he didn't want to have anything to do with who might be flying these things, and because he felt it hurt the credibility of the case. And they were also dealing with the contactees around that time. NICAP got started in around 1956. The contactees were prominent there, and there's a bit of a circus around the contactees. George Adamski claiming to have met a humanoid from Venus he called Orthon, who told him a common thread throughout the contactees' claims was that they were being told we should get rid of our nuclear weapons, which is a good message. Their claims, especially George Adamski's, were outrageous. Taken aboard ship and flown, to Venus and Mars and all over the place. And flown to lectures in South America by his Venusian friends. So this caused people like Keyhoe to avoid humanoids altogether. Meanwhile, over at APRO, they were open to humanoid reports. So that was a major difference between the two of them. And it actually got Keyhoe into trouble. And the investigator, APRO would kind of jab Keyhoe, saying that he focused too much on bullying the Air Force, focusing on the Air Force cover-up, whereas he should be investigating the saucers. You had that going on. You also had interactions between Jim Moseley and APRO. Moseley, when he put out, the first magazine he put out was called Nexus. And I'm going to roll back to the International Flying Saucer Bureau. There was this guy, Albert K. Bender. He lived in his stepfather's attic. His mother had just died, and his stepfather still had the house. So he lived in his stepfather's attic, and he created what he called his Chamber of Horrors up there. He was a young man, and he put scary pictures on the walls, skeletons and rubber snakes, and had records of sound effects, and would invite his friends over to his Chamber of Horrors. This was interesting enough to get an article in a Bridgeport newspaper. But he decided he wanted to form a saucer club, essentially, but he called it the International Flying Saucer Bureau. He sent a letter it was Amazing Stories. Fate magazine started, was Ray Palmer. He sent a letter to Amazing Stories looking for investigators, and Gray Barker got in touch with him. Gray Barker became the chief investigator in West Virginia. So he had an International Flying Saucer Bureau. He put out his first issue of their magazine, Space Review, We Review Space, in October 1952. The October 1953 issue had a statement that we have found the answer to flying saucers, but we can't tell you. We advised those in saucer research to be very careful. So Moseley riffed on this in Nexus, and he first said he had the answer. There was going to be a big announcement in the next issue, and then it never came. The next issue came, and he apologized again. He realized he backed himself into a corner, and then said, we have the answers, but we can't tell you. We advise those in saucer research to be very careful. So he was obviously poking fun at Bender. Bender shut down the Flying Saucer Bureau at that point. He told his friends that 3 Men in Black had come to him and told him to quit investigating flying saucers. That caused a lot of debate. This is Moseley poking fun at Bender through Nexus. Well, Cora Lorenzen didn't get the joke, so she started writing in the APRO Bullet, how can he says he has the answer and he won't tell us? She didn't get the joke. She set herself up as a butt of Moseley's pranks. That's the kind of interaction that was going on at the time. There'd be an event, they'd all have their different viewpoints. Moseley would stir up a hornet's nest, and they'd go at at each other. What I found though is that there was a lot more of this kind of interaction between them when things were slow. Once a bunch of good cases came in, they were all business. There was a lot less of that going on.
When it came to witnesses of UFO encounters, were there descriptions of what they saw and experienced similar, and how were they affected by their encounters?
Were there similar experiences?
Those who have had experiences, were they similar? Were they different? And how were some of the people affected by them?
When you go through the cases, I also write a blog once a week for Martin Willis over at Podcast UFO. And I've been doing it once a week with very few breaks for 4 years. So I've looked at a lot of cases and you see patterns, but it's not the same pattern. So you can say, okay, this is a group of people who have experienced this. Like one common thing that shows up is Klieg conjunctivitis, which is a welder's burn. I'm actually a welder. I've experienced this and it hurts very badly. It's basically sunburn of the eye. So a lot of witnesses actually complain about this and seek medical treatment for it. So that's like one thing where they're affected. Another thing is sometimes their lives just go down the toilet after this. Either it messes up their heads so badly they can't function. Dale Spar he couldn't function as a police officer after his experience, and he ended up working in a coal mine and he lost his entire family. So that's the thing you see, and that's like a really sad story. Woodrow Derenberger, he was a case in 1966 where he saw what he thought was a car go by him. It turned out to be a craft he described as being shaped like a kerosene lantern, and a guy came out of it dressed in shiny black clothing. The craft took off and Derenberger said the guy came telepathically, told him to roll down his window. They had a conversation and the guy didn't move his lips. So he told his story. You can hear the audio on YouTube. It's still preserved, even from that long ago. He told it on a television station the very next day. And it's like a pretty straightforward case there. He afterwards claimed that this being that he met, first thing he said, he told him his name was Cold. Later said that he'd had further meetings with him and he was told his name was Indrid Cold. He described him as initial meeting as having a very pleasant expression on his face, and he's become known in the mythos as the grinning man. And a lot of times you'll see him illustrated with this sinister grin. But where I'm going with this is Derenberger's claims started getting wilder and wilder. He started saying he was taken to this planet Lanulos. In the warm weather, they wear very little or no clothing. So they're basically like our nudists, as he says. He claims to be driven around in spaceships, that the people driving the spaceships pick him up in Volkswagens and drive him to the spaceships. So his claims start getting wilder and wilder. He started getting more and more dysfunctional. His family had to move because the crowds coming in on him looking for spacemen, some of them armed and looking to get a shot at a spaceman. His family was forced to move, and the harassment really did a number on him. This also happened to Frank Manor, who saw a craft in a swamp in Michigan, which caused a big stir in Michigan in 1966, where there were other sightings. And this led to a press conference led by J. Allen Hynek, where he offered the suggestion that they might have been seeing marsh gas igniting, going out in different places, giving the illusion of movement. This led to congressional hearings, the Air Force being dragged in to explain themselves. The press ran away with Hynek's explanation. They called it swamp gas, saying the Air Force explained it as swamp gas. But Manor, same harassment. He shows up in a video in an old UFO documentary saying, if he ever saw one again, he'd keep his mouth shut. He talks about people driving up and throwing bottles at his house and yelling nut. So that's another thing that happens to witnesses is they experience intense harassment. The people saw the family and friends who said they went through the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. They're known as Kelly Hopkinsville goblins in Kentucky. Same thing, crowds, huge crowds, just made their life a living hell. So that's another pattern. And they're affected to the point where they had to move. One guy had lost his job because of it. So these are instances where their lives are really wrecked. And other people deal with it, go on, end up speaking, like modern examples, Travis Walton. I'm sure everybody knows his case by now. He dealt with it. He went out and spoke about it. It did him all right, but obviously you're profoundly affected by an experience like that. I'm not saying it definitely happened. I'm not saying it's aliens, and I'm not saying they made it up either. Maybe they are telling the story as they experienced. What they experienced, I have no idea. So, those are examples.
How would you, Charles, describe the UFO phenomena today as compared to the golden age of flying saucers?
I think things got really messed up in the 80s and 90s. There was a lot of genuine disinformation. If you watch Mirage Men, the whole story of Air Force Office of Special Investigations Officer Richard Doty and his interactions with an investigator named Paul Benowitz, where he straight up lied to him, told him there was an underground base in Dulce, flew him over Dulce Mesa, threw him over Dulce, pointed down, and the claim is that he put props down there and said, look, see, there you go, there's your underground base. So that created this whole mythos of an underground base in Dulce, New Mexico. Then you also had guys like John Lear come out. John Lear, I personally think John Lear got a little brain damage during one of his plane crashes. He makes just some really wild and crazy claims, but he was also had connections with the CIA. So, what's going on? One speculation that I've had, and I've heard this from others, is that we were in sort of a paranormal arms race with Russia. So what better than to say we have a crashed saucer? So then the Bob Lazar story comes out. Bob Lazar's story looks shakier and shakier every day. Somebody had good evidence that he faked his badge and demonstrated it, and other things. You listen to Bob Lazar, he seems really earnest. And I go back and forth with this case all the time. And my thought is that this is part of a disinformation campaign. This is a guy out there testifying that he actually saw the craft that we have. What better than to have people in Russia what better than to have not only Russia, but our other adversaries, but particularly Russia at the time, to think we have alien tech at our disposal and are back engineering it to make weapons delivery systems. So that would put them on notice and make them think twice. Meanwhile, Russia, around the same period of time, footage came out of Russia, said to have been from, I think, the 1950s. It shows a disc stuck in the ground, leaning up against some trees. The Russians in uniforms that really look like they're from the period, and military vehicles that really look like they're from the period. People have looked at it and said, well, I don't see how, I think the trajectory was wrong. But in any case, a good bit of money was put into that. It could be Russia's answer to our Roswell and the Bob Lazar story. So things just got really screwed up, and a lot of just crazy people were coming forward just saying all kinds of things. One very common thing is to using nothing but your credentials. I'm a major general, I'm a colonel, I'm a whatever, and I've got super ultra high top clearance. Now I'm going to tell you a story with absolutely nothing to back it up, with no documentation, no evidence whatsoever, but I am who I say I am, so you should believe me. So that's what happened. Just things just started spiraling down the toilet in terms of credibility, but people were buying all this. So at least back then they had evidence, and that's what they were looking for, was really good evidence. I'm not saying that everybody in that time period, but it really threw a monkey wrench into it. And it came to light in 1989 when Bill Moore made a speech. William Moore was the person who resurrected Roswell. He's listed as a co-author with Charles Berlitz on the first book on the subject. Stanton Friedman is the guy who most likely, almost definitely did all the majority of the heavy lifting on the research end of that. So he was a superstar at the time, and Bill Moore had gotten involved with Richard Doty. Richard Doty approached him and basically gave him a devil's bargain, saying, we'll give you inside information if you give us information on some of these ufologists, what they're thinking, what they're looking at. He also got more involved with the campaign, basically with Doty's messing with Paul Benowitz. Paul Benowitz ended up, by the way, so paranoid by the time they were through with him that he ended up in a mental hospital. He seemed to be heading that way anyway, but they certainly didn't help. Moore came clean at the 1989 MUFON Symposium in Las Vegas. His speech he described as devil's bargain, and a lot of the information that's flying around now is just completely false, made up. So I think ufology is still recovering from the 80s and 90s. And a lot of people I've talked to on podcasts are still there. They've never left. It's like they've never heard Bill Moore's speech. They probably haven't. So I would recommend to anybody to listen to that speech and get a good idea of what was going down. So I think that's the major difference, is you have a lot of investigators that you can trust. There are also those that were you can't trust, but they were pretty obvious. People like Dr. Frank Stranges, for instance.
From the UFO investigators you've spoken spoken with Charles, what is their take, or is there a consensus amongst them as to the next chapter in the UFO phenomena, both by governments and ordinary citizens?
The closest thing to investigator I know is David Marler, who has the QFOS files and the NICAP files, along with a lot of Project Blue Book files and a huge collection of literature and magazines. And he has an archive out in New Mexico. And Martin introduced me to him, and I was invited over. I'm actually going out there again. So he's the closest thing to an investigator I know. We've had discussions. He really didn't go that way. So I can't answer to, what any discussions I've had with investigators. I know Linda Zimmerman, who is a champion of the Hudson Valley UFO wave. I've had discussions with her on a podcast, and Michael Warden, who they both do UFO headquarters. And I've talked with David and of course with Martin Willis. So in the course of our conversation, I think far too much focus is being put on what the Department of Defense is up to these days in terms of the Navy opening up a UFO investigation. And now NASA has jumped on board as well, saying they're going to do a scientific study. They've also taken the name away from us. They call them UAPs now. And the focus has been taken away from the investigators. So they're running the narrative. For a long time, it was To the Stars Academy, Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge and that whole crew. And everybody, all eyes were on them and waiting to hear what they had to say. So they were controlling the narrative. And it's all, we're going to look at this from a scientific point of view. And To the Stars Academy, we're also going to develop spaceships. Okay, thank you. Good luck with that. I personally would like to see more investigators, more boots on the ground investigators that the general population can turn to and give their reports to, and where they could collect the information. I would also like to see them archive that information and eventually make it available to the public. There are people out there still. Stan Gordon is still going, an awesome investigator out in Pennsylvania around Chestnut Ridge. He's found a correlation between UFO reports and Bigfoot reports, but he takes in the reports and this is what they said. That's as far as Stan goes. He doesn't speculate, which is something I really appreciate about him. He's getting on in years. He's been doing this since the Kecksburg incident. I think that was 1964. So he's doing this for a very long time. So a lot of these real good boots on the ground investigators that I think are worthy of a lot of respect are getting up and going away. So I would really like to see younger people get into this and get out of their armchairs and get out and do this kind of work.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy The Flying Saucer Investigators, how do they do that?
Amazon.com. It's available in Kindle, audiobook, hardcover, softcover. So Amazon.com. Charles Lear, The Flying Saucer Investigators. Yeah, you can see my weekly blog at podcastufo.com. A written version, Martin Willis's YouTube channel, Martin Willis Podcast UFO YouTube. So I do an audio version of the written blog as well.
Charles Lear, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. I wish you much success with your book.
Well, thank you so much, Stan. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched so that you don't miss any of my upcoming shows, where each week you'll find me yakking with a different outstanding guest. Be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. All you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.